Hey everyone, Sumo Spiffy here. It's tier list time again, this time for Kyushu, the final basho of 2025. This upcoming Friday, October 31st, spooky Halloween, we're gonna have our next live stream at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. GMT. That live stream will focus on community tier list picks based on the Google form you can find in the description. Also, we've remade the tier list. First, we've gotten rid of the injury tiers. A commenter suggested putting an asterisk on anyone whose performance may be hampered rather than put them on a whole other line. It's a good idea, so that's what we'll do. This also allows us to expand the tiers. S tier is the same, 12 or more wins. Rather than a single A tier though, we now have A plus 10 to 12 and A minus 9 to 11. B tier is still 8 to 10, the tier that promises a winning record. C plus and C minus are also the same. D tier is now 5 to 7 wins as opposed to just a losing record in general. That allows us to introduce F tier, 6 wins or less. After all, if you predict a wrestler's best case scenario isn't even getting adjacent to a winning record, you are indeed predicting a major fail. Alright, on to the tier list. Onosato and Hoshoryu. Finally, we have a reason to put both Yokozuna at the top. As always, Onosato's pretty much locked in here barring injury. But Hoshoryu finally seems healthy, or at least healthy enough to not be prevented from rolling up the 12 or 13 wins we should expect from him. There's not much to explain here, they both look like proper Yokozuna in September, and there's no reason to expect different from them in Kyushu. Aonishiki. I can hear the chorus of voices saying, finally. I thought about putting Aonishiki at A- since he's the main reason I created the 9 to 11 win tier. And with another basho under his belt, Aonishiki's head-to-heads create a 10-win expectation. By that metric, he's a perfect fit. But realistically, even if he's only beaten someone once or twice, in most cases he's still a significant favorite. And for me to choose A- 9 to 11 wins over A plus 10 to 12, I'd have to think he's more likely to lose 2 matches than usual than he is to win 1 more. Is it possible? Sure. But when some of his 4 losses in September were a surprise, it's hard to see how he then loses 2 more next time. Both A- and B tiers are a parade of the injured, but hey, let's start positive. Of all the injured wrestlers who wind up significantly underranked, Abi is one of the most curious recent cases. On the one hand, since he came back from his suspension, he's had 3 tournaments ranked below Maegashira 3. The first 2 were back-to-back 12-3 June U shows. The third was his 12-3 U show after he missed a tournament due to surgery. So that's a hell of a record at the lower ranks, but this is the first time he's dropped in rank due to a clear physical impairment but without a procedure to fix it. We know he should absolutely blast at this level, but he's surrounded by a relatively strong set of mid-rankers on top of the questions about his health. 9 wins seems like a minimum if he's even moderately healthy, but if he's not, any level of bad might be possible. Gonoyama. The last 3 guys to finish 1-14 in Makuuchi were Meisei, Shiminaumi, and Chiyoshoma. Meisei, we discovered later, had a bad back. Shiminaumi fell to Juryo and never returned, and Chiyoshoma's just happened mainly because he had surgery, rolled out of bed, and started fighting. There was no announced injury for Gonoyama, but since I don't think he's lost all ability to compete, he gets an asterisk just to note the real possibility he was hurt. In any case, Gono's in a similar situation as Abi. He's a double-digit rank for the first time since his 10-5 Makuuchi debut in 2023. He's never been below Maegashira 8 since, and at 8 West he went 11-4. But even though he just went 4-11 at rank 2 in May, that performance felt a far sight from the one we just saw. In May, he kept getting beat, in September he just couldn't win. If I'm correct that something happened to sap some of his power, he still probably got the juice to do pretty well in the lower ranks. His kryptonite is mobility combined with enough size to resist him initially. A lot of guys near the bottom either have poor mobility or are so small he only has to catch him once. But if he lacks some power, it's possible he lacks enough to be vulnerable even down there. Daieisho. On one hand, predicting at least 9 wins for Daieisho after the basho we just saw feels optimistic. Calf injuries can be tricky, and we can only guess at whether the trip to London impacted his ability to rest and heal. On the other hand, he spun a 1-5 start into a 7-8 finish, and it wasn't from his leg magically getting better. He figured out how to work effectively within that limitation. Even if he's in the exact same physical shape that he ended last basho, he'd have a good chance at 9 wins on that basis alone. As long as he hasn't aggravated anything, A- seems like a pretty good call. Kotozakura. Koto's knee injury gives him a serious asterisk given that knee issues were what almost tanked him out of Ozeki earlier this year. If his knee's at least relatively healthy though, he has quite a favorable set of fights awaiting him. The rest of the top 4 will probably beat him, but other than that, Takayasu's the only guy who routinely gives him issues. Unless he loses all his coin flip matches, a winning record should be no problem, and we might see his first double-digit win total this year. But 11 wins still seems like a stretch, so he's just in B tier. Onokatsu. I did not expect to place Onokatsu here when I started the tier list process, but he couldn't have asked for a better set of opponents over the first half of the basho. Back in May, when Roga returned from Juryo, I predicted a strong basho from him on a similar basis, and he started 7-3 before fading a bit to 9-6. In this case, Onokatsu stomps Ichiyamamoto and Midorifuji and stomped Kinbozan until losing to him in September. He's also pretty good against Oshouma, Atami, and Churanoumi, and I think he's a favorite against Abi if Abi is noticeably less than 100%. Sure, these opponents are tougher than Roga's were, but Onokatsu is also better than Roga. Plus, the half rank drop to 6 West offers some protection in that he's a little less likely to get dragged up the ranks for tougher fights as the basho goes on. If Onokatsu can't reach 8 wins here, that's probably going to look like a disaster. Wakatakakage and Kirishima. Sumo's most recent ex-Sekiwake both struggled through injury-influenced Septembers. It's hard to deny that Waka took the worst of it, at least in terms of morale, given the lost chance at Ozeki. But the question for both is, where do they go from here? Kirishima is like so many others who have come before in that he's very good, we can see it when his body cooperates, but at some point the trajectory of his health is going to turn down and stay down. We're not there yet, but I've stopped hoping we'll see him stay in one piece long enough to even tease an Ozeki run. Waka's steadier, but if his September stumble was due to his knee not holding up to the strain, that problem's only going to have better and worse days. It's not going anywhere. Obviously, both have proven they can go on big runs in Maegashira, and they should benefit from having easier fights later on. If you want to directly compare them to each other, I'd say Waka is the one I'm most confident will hit at least 8 or 9 wins, but Kirishima's wildly fluctuating results mean he might have the higher ceiling. Takayasu. Same old for Papa Bear. Onosato and, for whatever reason, Hakuoho are his only routinely bad matchups. Kirishima and Tamawashi are troublesome, but to be honest, those fights are as likely to swing on each guy's health as anything else. He was a shell of himself for the first week of September and still finished 7-8. As usual, full health throughout should result in an easy winning record. But the asterisk is doing as much work with Takayasu as anyone, the odds of him being at full health are simply unknowable until the basho starts. Wakamotoharu. Yet again, Wakadu sits at the top of C+. As usual, he's very likely to finish with a winning record. But his foot issues really kicked in during his 6-9 July, and 10 wins always looks like a stretch these days. 7-9 wins is simply a very safe prediction for him. Atamifuji. I had Atami in B tier for a little while for reasons similar to Onokatsu. His lineup looks very beatable, and he should be able to turn a strong start into a winning record. But Onokatsu and Abi, who he's likely to see early, are his 2 worst matchups, which reduces the odds of a good start. Plus, only dropping to 6 East means it's more likely he gets thrown in against the Waka Bros and Kirishima near the end, who absolutely roll him even when they're busted themselves. This should still be a good spot for him, but 7-8 is too plausible an outcome to make him B tier. High C+ it is. Yoshinofuji. We continue C+, but think of there being a gap between Atami and Yoshi, then another gap between Yoshi and everyone else. Yoshi's last basho as Kusano was only an 8-7, but apart from Ichiyamamoto, everyone he lost to was either doing quite well or named Daieisho. But that pushes him to 5 East at the tail end of the Joy and into a lot of Sanyaku bullseyes. Fortunately for him, it's common for whoever is in his position to not face the whole Sanyaku. Unfortunately, the guys he's certain to face are the 2 Yokozuna and almost certainly Kotozakura as well. But the prediction difficulty here is that he has almost no matchups against most of his prospective opponents. If I had to choose who would win based on what he can do, I'd pick Yoshi and a majority of them. Right now though, if things aren't going smoothly, he can get stuck thinking of what to do rather than just doing it. He'll get past that in time, but will that time be November? No idea. His schedule has far more possibilities than most. I'm guessing it'll be just friendly enough for another winning record. Kinbozan. This f***ing guy. What can I say? Last Basho inspired very little confidence, yet his only bad matchup is against Onokatsu, who he just beat for the first time. Of course, he also just lost to Midorifuji for the first time, who's likely to kick off his dance card again. Lower ranked matchups helped him recover after a terrible start in September, and they'll likely boost him here as well. I know this should be a low rank for him, but his general inconsistency makes asking for more than a probable Kachikoshi folly. If he picks this tournament to pop off for another 11 wins, so be it, I'll take the L. Tobizaru. If I was looking at this from purely an injury tier perspective, we could lock this in easy. And I'm still leaning C+ because 1, his early matchups lean good, and 2, at 9 West rather than the expected 8 East, he's far more likely to get a few chances to pick on the divisional basement. But he struggled when actual functional wrestlers came to play in September, and there should be more of them in his path this time. I'm assuming his right arm is somewhat better. If he's still forced to fight mostly without it, I suspect he'll drop to 6 wins, maybe even 5. Kotoshoho. I'd say oh how the mighty have fallen, but I think most fans didn't sip enough Kool-Aid to put Mighty and Kotoshoho in the same ballpark. Now Koto drops all the way to 10 West, only to find another gaggle of dudes who tend to beat him up. Fortunately, 2 of the main problems, Tobi and Daieisho, are dealing with their own physical issues. But Koto's another C+ largely because I see him abusing the lower ranks to get over the line. Also, like Gonoyama, he gets an asterisk just because he was so bad in September that he very well could have been hurt. Fujinokawa. I'm trusting that Fuji's decent finish to September, combined with taking the tape off his elbow, means he was doing at least okay at the time. Given another month and a half to recover, I'm gonna believe he goes into this mostly healthy. That said, his nearby opposition looks tough, and he may not have a great start to the Basho. If he can keep his record near 50-50 though, the surprising drop to 12 East should serve up a lot of low-ranked, very beatable opposition. Because of that schedule dependency, I have him pretty low in C+, but if the schedule swings even more in his favor than I expect, he may go off again. Hakuoho. I may have fought myself on this one more than any other pick. I yo-yoed Hakuoho from high C+ to low C-, although never out of those 2 tiers. Once again, his opposition has tended to do quite well against him. He has 2 positive matchups by the numbers, and 1 is Onosato, who he can't expect to keep beating. We also don't know what state his arm will be in when the tournament begins. And yet, time after time, he keeps finding a way to get it done. If he continues to wreck Takayasu, he really only needs to go 2-4 against the rest of the Sanyaku to have a realistic shot at a winning record. Even 1-5 might do it if it weakens his schedule enough later on. I choose to believe that 1, he'll do it again, and 2, if he does hit 8 losses before the end, he'll keep fighting just as hard. Not everyone does. Nishikifuji. Nishikifuji's our first entrant from the actual bottom of the division, mainly because that whole group looks like a complicated game of rock, paper, scissors. He's got a couple generally good matchups against Meisei and Asakoryu, and he's looked pretty healthy after getting bludgeoned out of the division in March. But being a little fragile is just part of who he is at this point, which downgrades his potential performance, and I'm not sure what'll happen when he fights up in rank. Still, I'm banking on him keeping it together just enough to put him at the bottom of C+. Oho. Much to my surprise, Oho lands at the top of C-. I'm not overcorrecting for September either, or at least I don't think I am. I mean, I didn't miss the fact his last 3 opponents in September were Ryuden, Kusano, and Oshouma, who he should beat most of the time. That's a nice springboard to 10-5. But I usually grade him down because his matchup list looks terrible, and that's just not the case this time. He does have several tough matches, but he's also quite good against the bottom of the Joy: Tamawashi, Ura, Oshouma, and Yoshi. The difficulty in predicting his finish is that, the way scheduling works, he could face anywhere from 1 to all 4 of the guys in that group. Granted, any of them he doesn't fight should probably be replaced by a contender from further down, and Oho is someone who should smash the lower ranked guys, but he's definitely vulnerable to someone on a solid roll. 6 wins is still more likely than 9, so into C- he goes, but if he's ever going to exceed expectations while in the Sanyaku, now's the time. Asakoryu. I remain more hopeful than anything about Asakoryu having a winning record. Sure, the one time he didn't finish 6-9 in Makuuchi was at 17 West, his current rank, but he also blew through 3 Makuuchi pretenders in the first 4 days, and he doesn't have any of those available this time. Chiyoshoma, Shonanoumi, Sadanoumi, and Ryuden are all broadly good matchups for him, which should outweigh his issues with Mitakeumi and having never found a win against Nishikifuji. If he doesn't sprint out of the gate though, then he needs a friendly schedule to find his winning record, and there's never a promise of that happening. Shishi. I am torn about Shishi. Mobile Shishi is the one that needs to show up for him to get anything done, and we just saw him in full force in November after a few bashos away. But showing up at 18 East and then after a probably unwarranted overpromotion to 11 East are not the same. His early matchups are okay, but once he fights more down in rank he could get anyone, and his basho will look a lot different if he gets to fight Tokihayate, Sadanoumi, and Asakoryu, who he ruins, or Ryuden, Shonanoumi, and a healthy Meisei who stomp him right back. This is very much a pick based on what Shishi should be capable of doing. If his leg isn't right or his schedule turns bad, he could spend the whole basho getting dunked on. Oshoumi. Oshoumi got my attention when he came back from a poor initial run in Juryo to start last November 9-0 before injuring his arm. After that, as long as he wasn't hurt, he kept up the strong performances and had clearly leveled up as a wrestler. Problem is, he's been injured quite a bit and recently enough for it to remain a concern. On top of that, although he's a solid athlete, some of his counterparts made it clear there's a wall in his way. He can beat the guys on one side pretty easily, but the better ones on the other side usually whoop him. And that was happening in Juryo. Like Hitoshi last basho, I'm putting him in C- rather than D because he has the size and power to do work, even if it's hard to envision him being wildly successful. 6 wins should be very doable, let's just hope he doesn't tweak his arm again. Meisei. If you saw September, there's not much for me to say. Meisei was a physical mess to an extent that impacted him at a low rank for the first time. He's good enough to make this basho not completely hopeless, but at this point, he needs to prove his health. We can't assume it'll be there. Churanoumi. If Churanoumi was anyone else, I'd say this basho has 7 wins written all over it. But Churanoumi's the guy who simply refuses to have a simple 7 or 8 win tournament. If he can find a few wins early against difficult opposition, Midorifuji and Daieisho are very tasty matchups that can either accelerate a good record or help him recover from a poor one. He's one of Oshoma's few really good matches though, and Atami, Onokatsu, Abi, Ichi, and Tobi have all been successful against him in the past. He's 1-1 against Yoshi, but I don't really like that fight for him over the long haul either. C- makes sense because if he struggles, he should be good enough against other poor performers to make up some ground. But all those 4-11s on his ledger make this feel much more like a roll of the dice than it would be with most of his compatriots. Shodai. This is the perfect spot for the Dark Lord. 5 West is not supposed to fight any of the Sanyaku. If someone gets hurt and forces him into those fights though, will he go all woe is me and collapse, or will he have some positivity going on and get after him? If we could be assured no one above him gets hurt, I might lean slightly towards a winning record. But even with relatively few injuries of late, it's always possible, and simple poor performance in the Joy has also made the schedulers reach further down for Sanyaku opponents. C- on the basis there are too many ways for his schedule to go bad. Chiyoshoma. Doesn't it feel like Chiyo's Henka Kinboshi, which was a work of art don't at me, was about 2 years ago rather than this past March? Logic says I should have more faith in a guy who was doing quite well at a much higher rank than this in the same calendar year. But anyone who's watched Chiyo for long enough knows that was an overperformance, and this is still the guy who went 1-14 in July coming off back surgery. I would like his chances a lot more if some of the Juryo lifers luckboxed their way into the division, but everyone around him is reasonably legit this time. Roga. I mean, we all know he's going 7-8, where else would I put him? Ichiyamamoto. I won't debate if Ichi deserved to be so significantly under-demoted, but I will say it doesn't seem to have done him many favors. Onokatsu, Tobi, and Daieisho usually wreck him, so he better hope Tobi and or Daieisho are still a mess. The best matchups near him are Shodai, Churanoumi, and Kotoshoho. However, Churanoumi is the only one he's likely to face early. That puts him in some rough waters over the first 6 to 8 days, and he better be a lot more ready than he was in September if he wants to stay afloat. Tamawashi. In an effort to get the tier list done sooner, I started the process before the Banzuke came out, trusting I wouldn't get it too terribly wrong. One small mistake that wound up having a big effect was swapping Tamawashi and Ura. Tamawashi's Basho at 4 East looks considerably different than it did at 3 West. Let's remember, one of the reasons he popped off with that 11-4 in July is he was allowed to get on a roll and just unload it on everyone. At 3 West, we could expect 3 fights before he had to face the Sanyaku, which probably wouldn't be enough. At 4 East, he'll likely have 5. Plus, if he were to fight the same ranks Churanoumi did at this spot last Basho, his lineup would be Ura, Yoshi, Oshouma, Churanoumi, and Kirishima. The only bad matchup there historically is Kiri, and Tamawashi's won 2 of the last 3 there. It's unlikely he goes steamrolling through everyone like he did a few months ago, but this much nicer start on its own has elevated him from D tier. That's how much I think it'll help. Midorifuji. Given the guys Midori has to fight, placing him at C- is the highest compliment I can pay him. I didn't think someone could have this many difficult matchups without any of them being in the Sanyaku, but there are 5 guys he'll likely face who absolutely take his lunch money: Shodai, Onokatsu, Churanoumi, Abi, and Shishi. And that doesn't include Kinbozan, who usually does the same. I just took the edge off that one because Midori beat him in September. It's so bad, there's hardly even room for good matchups. The only reason he's not in F tier is because he constantly takes these terrible starts and spins them around to salvage a decent record. And the guys he would fight to make up for what looks like a terrible start are not as difficult for him as the ones he'll face early. But if you're a Midori fan, be happy if he starts 3-6 against this group. Tokihayate, Sadanoumi, and Ryuden. Everything I could think to say about one applied to them all, at least with respect to what they'll do in the ring. Their Bashos don't look quite the same. Ryuden has the most very good matchups, but also the most bad ones. Tokihayate has the fewest, Sada's in the middle. But all 3 are likely to struggle as their opponents get higher in rank, so they all need a strong start to have a decent chance at a winning record. And all of them can do it, but none of them are likely to. Churanoumi. I was going to put Churanoumi at C- on the vibes. His expected lineup in September was terrible and he got 8 wins, so why not? Plus, given that he looked as good last Basho as he has in a while, that might lead to another unexpected win or 2. But that benefit I said Tamawashi might get from being here helped Churanoumi last time. He started 4-1, beating Gonoyama, Wakamotoharu, and Atamifuji in the first 4 days. But Gono and Atami are great matchups for him, even ignoring how badly they did, and he won't see Wakamotoharu for a while. He's got some coin flips in there, Oho, Takanosho, Hakuoho, Ura, but so many bad matchups. Given how they schedule the Joy all the way to the end, especially the top 3 ranks, the only way he escapes is to do terribly at the start so he's no longer a suitable opponent. Even more things have to go right this time than last for him to reach 8 wins. If he does it, power to him. Takanosho. I figured Takanosho would be the next fresh Komusubi to get dropped straight into D tier, but his lineup is so friendly this wound up being a tough decision. He's not that bad against the rest of the Sanyaku, he's traditionally very good against Kirishima, and he has a lot of reasonably positive matchups at the bottom of the Joy. If it was guaranteed he'd fight Tamawashi, Ura, Oshouma, and Yoshi, I'd probably put him in at least C-. But depending on how everyone does, he could fight anywhere from 0 to all 4. The biggest problem is that if he does halfway decently, he'll end up against Maegashira contenders, and then it's a question of matchups. So he could get blasted early, and he could also get blasted late. If he gets a couple big wins early, I think he'll outperform this prediction, but the odds of that are poor. Shonanoumi. Okay, if we're gonna have a nice friendly competition, I can't just what the f tier Shonanoumi anymore. I have to make an actual guess. Fortunately, it's easier this time. Sadanoumi is his only probable opponent where he's a genuine favorite. Then Shishi if that matchup happens. Otherwise, it looks bad. If he keeps putting forth the effort like he's done the last couple tournaments, win or lose, it probably won't be a total disaster, but 6 or 7 wins seems most likely. Mitakeumi. Sorry Yuria, but this looks bad. Mitakeumi's 2 worst opponents, Ryuden and Gonoyama, are guys he may see the first 2 days. He has some friendly matchups later on, so again, there's some hope. But he's strongest early, so the real question is if he's still got it in him to take advantage of those good matchups once they come around, and if there are enough to carry him to 8 wins. It doesn't seem like it. Tomokaze. Watching Tomokaze bust dudes up in September was genuinely fun, and it seemed like maybe, just maybe, he might be finding the timing to work around his lack of mobility. If that's the case, he might still be able to do some work. But at Maegashira 12, he'll have more matches further up against the guys less likely to fall for his slapdown shenanigans. I still expect him to be a problem for smaller guys like Fujinokawa, Tokihayate, and Midorifuji, but I also expect him to see too many others who are big enough to work inside of the belt where he's basically helpless. Ura. Where Tamawashi got an upgrade from D tier thanks to the shift to 4 East, Ura's prospects absolutely tanked when he landed at 3 West. He's likely to face Tamawashi, Oshoma, and Yoshi the first 3 days. Statistically, he's about even with all 3. A 2-1 start would be pretty good. But then he'll likely spend the next 8 days facing 7 Sanyaku opponents and 1 other guy. The best case scenario is Kotozakura's knee limits his mobility too much to keep up with him, he goes back to winning against Takanosho, and he takes what's been a coin flip fight with Papa Bear. Even that would just put him at 5-5. As a fan, I'll take 5-5 with only Maegashira opponents left, but then there's Hakuoho, Kiri, and the Waka Bros. Kiri's beatable if he's not at his best, but the others just ruin poor Pinky. There's no way I could make Pinky Boy our first ever F tier pick, but I've seen war zones that look less destructive than Ura's next 15 fights. And finally, Oshoma. Oshoma's Komusubi disaster isn't the only time he was set to face the Sanyaku. He was also at this exact rank, 4 West, last November and went 4-11. In that basho, he started 2-5 against Maegashira opponents before the Sanyaku ever came into play. The Sanyaku will probably bust him up again, so any improvement will have to come in that first week. Unfortunately, he has arguably an even worse lineup than in 2024. Tamawashi has owned him all year. He's 0-5 against Atamifuji, although maybe Atami's hips will be in bad enough shape to give him a chance. He's 1-2 against Ura and 0-1 against Yoshi, which isn't much to go on, but he seems like an underdog in both those fights. He won 2 against Onokatsu before losing the last 2, so that matchup's turning against him. The only upside is that he's very good against Shodai. If he's lucky, he may get to fight Churanoumi, another strong matchup. If he struggles, he'd better hope the top 2 ranks do well, or else he might catch those hands at the end, which will just sink him further. Basically, he needs either the most busted scheduling luck or a truly bananas performance to even dream of 8 wins. He probably won't go 4-11 again, so I suppose D tier is the safer prediction, but we have an F tier now, we may as well use it. Congratulations Oshoma, you're a pioneer. And that's the tier list for November 2025. Once again, if you want to contribute to the community tier list, the form to do so is in the description. The overwhelming votes will become the community picks, and we'll use the live stream Friday to vote on the closer results. It's gonna be a good time. If you can make it, I'll see you there.